Hello, my name is Todd Bailey, and I am here today to talk to you about the unbelievable health benefits of dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. Now, you may never have heard of this remarkable substance, but it ought to be in your first aid kit. You should have it in your home. It is extraordinary. There are a lot of properties, a lot of health properties exhibited by DMSO. First off, it is cryoprotective, meaning it can protect organs or tissue that need to be kept really cold. For example, if a heart needs to be transplanted, it needs to be kept cold while it's being moved from one person to the next. However, if we use simply water and take the organ down to a low enough temperature to protect it, we get crystallization because water will freeze at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the organ needs to be kept even cooler than that. DMSO has a freezing point much higher, about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. The remarkable thing here is that if you mix DMSO with water, the freezing point drops significantly below the freezing point of water, so far less than 32 degrees Fahrenheit. That allows for keeping that organ, or even stem cells, extraordinarily cold without damaging the tissue. A pretty amazing property for DMSO. Next, DMSO is a powerful, natural anti-inflammatory. Inflammation is that redness and swelling we get around an injury. That's not a good thing. We want to be able to reduce that. DMSO does a really good job with lowering that inflammation. DMSO is also a natural NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like aspirin, but it doesn't have the side effects like aspirin. See, aspirin is really hard on your stomach and your GI tract. You can't do too much aspirin without having GI issues. DMSO doesn't have those, and yet it's a powerful NSAID and will help control pain. It's also a free radical scavenger. Now, this is important for controlling inflammation. DMSO is not just a direct anti-inflammatory. It's also great at eliminating the free radicals, which are damaged molecules. The damaged molecules come from oxidative stress and other bodily functions. The problem is they stay in your system and they'll affect your tissue and, among other things, trigger more inflammation. And we want to get out of that inflammation cycle. What DMSO does for the free radicals is that it will bind with those free radicals and carry them out of your system. Very important for controlling inflammation and tissue damage. DMSO is also a vasodilator. A vasodilator means that it helps to open up or expand your blood vessels. That's important when you've got that injury and you need to move some of the problematic fluids away from the injury. That is better facilitated with more expansion, more pathway space in those blood vessels. That vasodilation allows that. It also allows for bringing in nutrients and other substances to help fix the wound. So very important, the vasodilation for recovering from a wound or inflammation. It also helps with cell wall permeability. DMSO makes it easier for a cell to push out its waste and to bring in the nutrients that it needs because it helps reduce the stickiness of the cell wall, allowing that permeability. It's also a great transdermal agent. DMSO helps to push things into your skin, and that can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. We have to be very particular about what we want pushed into our skin. DMSO by itself passes through the skin. It'll do so in the course of about 10 to 20 minutes, and that will help with inflammation. We can also pair it up with other vitamins, minerals, essential oils that we want to bring into the body. DMSO is also an analgesic. It will tamp down or reduce nerve signals, that signaling of pain from an injury or irritation. It's also anti-nociceptive, which is a fancy way of saying that it helps protect the body against mechanical injury, chemical injury, and so forth. It's a great protective substance. It's even radioprotective. That means that it helps with radiation. If you have a full body scan, a full body x-ray, or you work in a nuclear facility, you're going to be exposed to a lot of radiation. DMSO will help to counter that radiation. Now, DMSO is also a remarkable carrier. We can pair it up with other substances that we want to add to the body. For instance, we might want to add essential oils. We want those to be carried into our joint, into our skin. DMSO will help with that. DMSO is also a muscle relaxant. It is a heavy metal detoxifier. So if you have something like cadmium, for instance, which you don't want to have in your body, it will bind with the cadmium and pull it out of your system. So very good heavy metal detoxifier. DMSO is kind of interesting. It is a natural substance that comes from trees, of all things. The trees have a cell wall, and in that cell wall they have something called lignin, and it's the lignin that is extracted in the wood pulping process, just a natural process for making paper and things like that. That is where DMSO comes from. It naturally occurs in the trees, and it's simply being extracted. So it's a natural substance, not something that is chemically created. Natural substance that just happens to have some extraordinary benefits. Now, I saw DMSO originally as a kid on the farm. We would go to the feed store where we'd get the veterinarian supplies, and I saw DMSO for horses. That's what caught my eye. DMSO can be used for horses that have an injury or inflammation in a joint, and it's very helpful for healing that inflammation and that injury. It speeds up the whole healing process. I even had some buddies who used DMSO back in high school for athletic injuries. They would go to the vet supply place, pick up some DMSO. If they had a sprained ankle, they'd rub it on the sprained ankle, and by golly, they recovered much more quickly. And that's important. It's a great substitute for what I've experienced in the past. Now, in high school, I did not use it on myself. Instead, I used what my orthopedic surgeon wanted me to use. I used pain-killing drugs, pain-masking drugs. I had my first surgery, my first major surgery, on my left knee as a sophomore in high school. My next major surgery came after basketball of my senior year. To play basketball, I had to go see my surgeon. I'd hurt that knee again. And he said, I've got the way that you can play. He prescribed something. And now I don't recall what it was. It was either an NSAID or an opioid. At any rate, I could take the pill and diminish the pain and play basketball. And it was awesome until about halfway through the basketball season. I developed a reaction to that medication. I had to go off the medication. And we knew at that point that I had done some serious damage to my knee, but I couldn't feel it because the pain was masked. I didn't take something that would help with the healing. I took something that would simply mask the pain, which is great, I suppose, to some degree, except that it allowed me to do a lot of serious damage. At the end of that basketball season, I had to get that knee rebuilt again. And we found at that point that I had chewed through part of the cartilage in my knee. In fact, I had a hole in the cartilage about the size of a quarter. And I was only 18 years old, and I was already grinding bone on bone. That's the sort of thing that you have before you get a knee replacement. I could have used a knee replacement at age 18, but the doc said I was too young, that I needed to wait. So I got to put up with that grinding bone on bone for a few more decades, simply because we used something that masked pain but didn't aid healing, like DMSO would have done. The DMSO itself was discovered back in the 1800s, but it didn't really take hold until the 1950s. British scientists found that cryoprotective aspect of DMSO, which is pretty exciting. And then the other uses from DMSO started to blossom in the 1960s, in particular through the work of Dr. Stanley Jacob. Stanley Jacob. He is, or was, a professor at the University of Oregon Medical School. He was the head of the transplantation department, so the organ transplants. He was fascinated by the cryoprotective element of DMSO, but he studied it. He and his team studied DMSO and started to find that it could do more, so much more. And that's how we have identified about 40 different things that DMSO can do for us. A DMSO for pain. This is particularly important for folks like me. I've had 20 orthopedic surgeries. Controlling chronic pain is a big deal for me and for a lot of folks. DMSO itself will help with inflammation. It helps to reduce the actual chemicals that are causing the inflammation, like the cytokines that settle in where I have an injury. It will remove those, bind with those, and remove those from the site, so I bring the inflammation load down somewhat. It's binding with free radicals. Those free radicals are the damaged molecules, which are incurring more damage and creating more inflammation. It's also a natural non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. So it's a pain reliever with some other analgesic value. The analgesic value is that it will stop nerve signaling. It will be able to interact with nerve fibers and stop the signaling of pain to the brain, saying, I've got pain here. So it's helping with the pain, but it's also helping with the healing. So I'm no longer just not just masking those symptoms, which turned out to be tragic for me. It just made a heck of a mess. On top of that, DMSO is great at taking other substances into the body. It's a great transdermal agent. So if I want to combine it with something else, then I can have that transferred or transported more efficiently into my body. Now, I've got to be careful here. If I'm going to use DMSO on my body, I want to make sure that I clean the area where I'm going to put it on my body. So if I'm going to put it on my elbow, I'm going to give it a good wash first, because I don't want any undesirable substances coming in. For instance, if I've been out working on the car and I've got motor oil on my arm, I want to get rid of that first. Wash it really well first, because the DMSO will help with absorption, including absorption of motor oil. So I don't want that. I want to clean the site where I'm going to put on the DMSO. Now, as far as the things I might combine with the DMSO, high up on the list will be CBD. CBD is great for inflammation and pain, and then just an overall balance of the system. It helps with the endocannabinoid system, which is a system much like your nervous system. It's extensive, it's throughout your body, and it's important that we have some homeostasis or balance in that system. If I put CBD on topically by itself, it absorbs somewhat. It does not absorb really well. Worse yet, if I do what I see in some of the CBD products that I see at CBD stores, if I take CBD and I put it into a heavy wax and then put it on my body, then the absorption is going to plummet. I'm not going to get very much CBD in my system at all. Instead, I'll combine the CBD with DMSO so that I can get the CBD into my skin, through my skin, and into my underlying tissue, because I want it into my joints, I want it into my muscles, I want it to affect my entire system. I can also pair up DMSO with some essential oils like frankincense or wintergreen, copaiba, lavender, peppermint, and others, depending on what I want to do. The essential oils can be pretty darn powerful. After I got my first knee replacement about a decade ago, my doctor prescribed a bunch of opioids, in fact, 3 at the same time. I could take the opioids and get relief for about an hour. The relief was important because I got full knee replacements. And with a full knee replacement, you typically have the end of your femur cut off, the end of your tibia cut off, and often the bottom of your kneecap cut off, and then you get appliances put in. And it's a somewhat violent surgery. You're invading the joint capsule itself. There's a lot of cutting, a lot of, in my case, stapling, because I had so many previous surgeries that we needed staples to hold the incision site together. Now, back to the opioids. They were awesome, but only for about an hour. And then I couldn't take them again for about 3, 4, or 5 hours. That was not all that awesome, because I would try to sleep at night. I could take the opioids, I'm out for an hour, and then I'm up for 3 or 4 hours before I can take another shot. After 2 days of that, I'd had enough, and I let my wife do what she had been suggesting. She had a cream that she had made up with some essential oils, including a lot of frankincense and a lot of wintergreen, both of which are great with inflammation and pain. We found that she could rub that on my feet. That's all, just on my feet. And I would get 3 to 4 hours of pretty good relief, and I could actually sleep. With DMSO, I can do the same thing with frankincense, wintergreen, copaiba, and other essential oils. Combine them with the DMSO, and I get amazing absorption into my system. I can do it on my body, on my feet. I can do it all over the place and get that kind of relief that I'm looking for. Additionally, I like hyaluronic acid. I want hyaluronic acid into my system. It absorbs fairly well depending on the molecular weight. Most of the time, if you go to the store and you're picking up a skin cream, something moisturizing, the hyaluronic acid that you might see on the label, that will be a high molecular weight hyaluronic acid. So it's a little bit bigger molecule. It's not going to absorb very much further than a layer or 2 into the skin. So it's great for the skin, but I want to do better. Hyaluronic acid helps lubricate our joints. It helps our tissue. It helps the connective tissue in particular to function well. I want that hyaluronic acid into my system. So in one of my formulations, we use hyaluronic acid, and we'll use at least 2 molecular weights. So something that's maybe medium sized, that'll go down well into the skin and beyond, and then a low molecular weight, meaning smaller molecule of hyaluronic acid, to get deep penetration into the joint, being pushed by the DMSO. I can also use MSM and other things that my body will need, combine them with the DMSO, and they're coming in where I want to get those benefits. The chemistry of DMSO is interesting. And I bring this up because sometimes we hear about sulfur allergies. Sulfur allergy actually doesn't exist. Your body cannot be allergic to elemental sulfur. Sulfur, I think, is the 7th most common element in our bodies. If we're allergic to sulfur, we're allergic to our bodies. So what we're allergic to are certain substances that contain sulfur and more things. For example, if you have sulfa antibiotics, there's a lot more going on than just the sulfur. Those are sometimes, well, the technical name is the sulfonamide. And the sulfonamides can be or can trigger a histamine reaction, a severe allergic reaction. Some people can't take sulfa-based drugs. Other people have trouble with sulfites, which are preservatives. You'll find them sometimes in like dried fruit, wines, and sulfites can also trigger an antihistamine response and can be terribly problematic and be a horrible allergic response. Sulfates also have a sulfur element and more stuff thrown in. Sulfates are like the element you put into shampoo to make it all foamy. And a lot of folks react negatively to that. It's not the sulfur itself, it's all the other stuff combined with the sulfur. So it's not the sulfur. So you can't actually be allergic to elemental sulfur. As far as the chemistry of DMSO, it's just oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, and sulfur, all common elements in your body. Now, there are chances that you're going to have some skin irritation when you do try DMSO. If you're trying a DMSO liquid, for instance, and it's not diluted and you put it on your skin, it's going to be quite irritating. Part of the problem, well, actually, it's twofold. First, DMSO helps with elimination of toxins. It's helping with cell wall permeability so those toxins can get out of the cells. That can be quite irritating. The other problem is that DMSO loves to bind with water. When you put DMSO on your skin, it's going to grab onto some of the water molecules and give you a sense of dryness, in fact, that itch that comes from a deep dryness in your skin. If the DMSO is too concentrated, you're going to have that itch, that irritation. It's not permanent. It's not going to be a terrible thing, but it is quite uncomfortable. So you have to do the DMSO property. In particular, with some of the formulations that we use, we'll put DMSO into a product that contains aloe vera, for instance. Aloe is very soothing. It has some anti-inflammatory properties, and it mellows the speed of the absorption of the DMSO and moisturizes at the same time. So we're pulling a little bit of water and giving a little bit of water. So you're not going to have that same level of irritation. You can also get a garlic smell with DMSO. So if I have a liquid DMSO bottle and I leave the cap off, it's going to start to smell a little garlicky. And that doesn't mean it's going bad. What it means is you've got a little bit of a chemical reaction going. DMSO draws water. It'll actually draw water right out of the atmosphere. If I have a bottle of DMSO, let's say it's 1 ounce, and I leave it open overnight, in the morning, if I measure it, it's going to be a little more than 1 ounce because it's drawing water molecules and binding with those. When it binds with those, it gives off a little bit of a garlic scent. Also gives off just a little bit of heat. Either one is bad, although I'm not a real fan of the garlic smell if I'm rubbing it all over my body. So we want to just make sure that when we're using a DMSO product, that we store it properly, keep the lid on. And as far as storing it, we typically use glass because it does not react with glass. DMSO is fine in glass. It's also fine with some plastics, but not all plastics. For example, polypropylene works really well with DMSO. And that's really important because when I've got a glass jar with product in it, I've still got to put a lid on. I can't have a glass lid. Polypropylene works really well. There are some plastics that don't work so well. Silicone doesn't work well because DMSO is a solvent. That's part of the reason that it can move through the skin. It's able to make things, actually just switches positions with water. It's like it's grabbing onto water, a water molecule, and it pulls the water and then takes its position. It can also grab onto fat, a fat molecule, gives it a pull, and then the DMSO molecule takes its position. It's a solvent in that it can break the bonds so it can move through. Don't be alarmed just because it's a solvent. Water is the universal solvent. Water works really well for breaking things down. So it's a solvent, that's okay. One other point of precaution. If you are taking prescriptions, then you should talk to your healthcare provider before you use DMSO. Now, if you're using DMSO topically, that's pretty mellow. If you take DMSO internally, then you've got to talk to your healthcare provider because DMSO helps with the absorption of things. There are some medications that we take that you need to absorb at a certain rate, and if you combine that with DMSO, you can speed up the absorption. Not necessarily a good thing. So you've got to make sure that you're talking to your healthcare provider when you're doing that. Now, I am not a doctor, but I have had 20 orthopedic surgeries. I think that I have the bona fides to talk about DMSO and its amazing benefits. I've used DMSO for 6-7 years now, and I'm doing things now that I couldn't do a decade ago. I'm able to do things in the weight room. I'm able to do hiking, walking, all kinds of things that I couldn't do previously. And I attribute most of that to using DMSO. In fact, I use DMSO several times a day, especially where I've had the surgeries, because DMSO will help to soften the buildup of scar tissue, which I have, and many of us do, especially when I've had the knee surgeries. I've had 13 knee surgeries, 6 on one knee, 7 on the other. All of those incisions, all of that work will lead to a buildup of scar tissue. DMSO helps to soften that scar tissue so they don't have that joint binding up. So it's been really important to me. It's gotten me back into the game. Now, if you go online, you might see that the FDA poo-poos DMSO a little bit. And this is interesting because they're talking out of both sides of their mouths. At times, the FDA will say, don't use DMSO, and yet the FDA approves DMSO for all kinds of medical uses, such as interstitial cystitis, which is a bladder issue, very painful. The procedure for DMSO and interstitial cystitis involves injecting a DMSO solution into the bladder to help settle things down. The FDA also uses DMSO for all sorts of experimentation, for drug delivery, for drug bulking, and for tissue preservation. There are thousands of articles on DMSO. When you're looking at the articles, make sure you go to the right place. If you go to WebMD, well, actually don't bother going to WebMD. That's really just a marketing arm of the pharmaceutical companies. If you go to WebMD, you're going to find that DMSO doesn't do much, frankincense doesn't do much, all sorts of things that we know work don't do much. And yet if you go to PubMed, which I love, PubMed is where you can go for real studies, peer-reviewed, and you'll find thousands of articles there that are peer-reviewed, scientific, provable studies about the usefulness of DMSO and all the awesome things that it can do. So if you're really curious to see the scholarly side, go to PubMed. Anyway, I recommend that you get a hold of some DMSO, start making it part of your daily routine like I do. I promise you will see some extraordinary results. And then down below in the notes, I'll tell you how to get a hold of some of this, tell you how to find DMSO, and even show you where you can find some products that are just extraordinary and have great recipes for helping with things like chronic pain, fibromyalgia, nerve irritation, all sorts of things where DMSO really shines. Thanks for making it to the end of this. I hope it's been helpful, and goodbye.